Chapter 26, Tuesday, January 20th to Friday, February 6th, 1778. I twisted my ear so often in the weeks that followed, it swelled like a puffball. Did me no good. I still thought about Isabel. Her face had poisoned my mind the way the cold had taken hold of my bones. Sore ear and cold bones aside, life had become tolerable on account of our little hut. Sleeping whilst sheltered by walls and a roof is vastly more comfortable than sleeping under the open sky, even if the roof did leak in spots. Though most huts in camp were completed, thousands of soldiers were unfit for duty because their clothes were falling to pieces. Those without shirts covered their form with blankets or rags when necessity forced them out to use a privy trench. Many suffered from the death of their toes and fingers on account of frostbite. I cannot bring myself to describe the state of the lads who had no breeches. Because my company was mostly clothed and shod, we worked more hours than some. We fell into a regular pattern. Dawn revel, work on the fortifications meant to protect us from attack, breakfast, more work, dinner, chop and haul firewood, supper at dark. The middle of the day was tolerable warm, but after dawn and near sunset, the cold ate through my clothes and gnawed on my bones. The best hours came after the sun dropped behind Mount Misery. We'd retire to our hut, cook up the day's rations of dry peas and meats, with a few cabbage leaves or potato when fortune smiled, and eat as slow as we could manage. We devised a rotation to take turns sitting directly in front of the fire, 2 by 2, to play checkers. Greenlaw had fashioned a checkerboard on a plank. Bits of twigs stood in for the black checkers, and shards of bone for the white. Sylvanus stole extra time where it was warmest by cooking tonics for our health, boiling butternut bark or spruce tips or moss in the kettle. These remedies required constant stirring and tasting. The tailor was near 3 times as old as us and had grown painfully thin, so there was little protest about his unlawful hearth-sitting. Aaron Barry did once whine about Sylvanus's habit. Greenlaw lost his temper and offered to remove all of Aaron's teeth with his fist, which caused Aaron to crawl up into his bunk, gnawing on his toothstick like a discontented beaver. When we were not the appointed checker players, Eben and I worked on our wood carvings. My bird was slowly transforming from the beaked pig into a sheep carrying a knapsack. Eben was much better than I. He could carve the likeness of a horse in 2 nights' work. He was never satisfied, though, and he threw each one into the fire. The hut filled with boasting, conversating, wagering, and wild tales every night. We'd itch the vermin feasting on our flesh and share the day's many rumors. The king had declared peace. No, the king was sending German and Russian mercenaries to destroy us. A ball of fire as big as a man's head fell from heaven to Hatboro, a good omen. But there had been an earthquake near New York just as a cat gave birth to puppies, which meant the worst. Congress was fleeing to Spain. No, Congress was coming to Valley Forge. Smallpox was killing thousands of soldiers. Nay, the variolation against smallpox had killed them. Birds flew backwards over Pennsylvania. A talking cow had been displayed in Georgia. And always, the wild tales that more food, better food, and blankets and clothing were on the way, and we would soon be paid for the first time in months. That made us laugh. Sooner or later, someone would throw a pebble or twig at Benny and beg a story from him. The lad had read every book ever printed, it seemed, and happily recounted for us the ancient tales of evil kings, beautiful queens, quarreling gods, monsters, and heroes. At the start of February, we enjoyed clear skies and warm days that melted most of the snow and thawed my finger bones some. Captain Russell armed us with shovels, axes, hatches, ordering us to strengthen the outer line fortifications. 1,000 of us dug trenches deep enough for a man to stand in up to his neck. We wove an abatis, a giant tangle of a fence with long, sharp-tipped poles that would gut any British horse that tried to leap the barricades. I made a point to be friendly with a few of the black soldiers I met on fortification duty, a fellow named Salem from Massachusetts, Shadrach from Virginia, and Windsor from Rhode Island. The vast encampment was home to hundreds of fellows like us, mostly free, though some had been enlisted by their masters. We complained about the food and the water and everything else under the sun, the way all the soldiers did, but we were able to do it in full companionship, without worrying about lack brains like John Burns. It was an uncommon sensation and most pleasant. I asked them to keep watch out for Isabel, a girl with a scarred face and an irritating manner, after that war, and to show her kindness if they ever met her. One day it became so warm while we worked on the abatis, we all stripped off our coats and wiped the sweat from our faces. Some lads from Gloucester made us a game of hitting at rocks with stout sticks, but officers put a stop to the sport before it caused us to forget our duties. Once they'd gone, the game started up again. We took care to post sentry guards and took turns batting at the sphere. My company scored the greatest number of hits and claimed the top prize, a freshly killed possum. We hurried back to the hut to cook it, arms sore and ravenous. The provision wagons from Maryland and New Jersey had arrived near empty that week, and the whole camp had been on half rations because of it. Possum tastes better than you might think. Chapter 27, Friday, February 6th, 1778. My kidneys woke me late in the night. I needed to piss. I tried to ignore the sensation, turning this way and that for relief. The wind had picked up and water no longer dripped onto the floor. This evil portent meant that the roof was again iced over and relieving my kidneys would be a painfully chilly exercise. I shut my eyes tight and resolved to sleep until it was warmer. My kidney distress increased. I groaned a bit and stood, wrapping my blanket around me and resolving to walk only a few steps from our door before I did the necessary business. "Don't you dare piss next to the hut," warned Sylvanus about me. "I'll be checking in the morning, I swear. Can't abide lads too lazy to do the proper walking." "Wouldn't dream of it," I muttered. I stepped with caution in the dark, frozen path. The cold jabbed my kidneys harder, and I was forced to trot lest I spoil my breeches. "You there," called a harsh voice in the shadows. I ignored this insult and hurried on. The foul-mouthed dastard did not follow me. I took care of the business of the privy trench quick as possible, buttoned my breeches, pulled my collar up and hat down, and headed back to the hut. Snow had started to fall. I managed only a dozen paces before 3 figures stepped out of the darkness and blocked my way. I turned on my heel, but was grabbed before I could start running. A hard fist drove into my belly. I would have fallen to the ground, but the hands held me fast while I coughed and fought to get back my breath. "That's no way to greet your commanding officer," said John Burns. I regained my breath and stood. The 2 men holding me grasped my arms tighter. These new allies of John Burns were larger and more dangerous than the Barry brothers, now snoring in my hut. "I've come to extract my payment," Burns explained in the tone of a foppish dandy. "I don't owe you anything," I said. He chuckled. "I told these gentlemen all about the card games you lost and how you refused to honor your debts." "I've never played cards with you." "Shut it." The fellow to the right smacked my head so hard it sent my hat flying. "I'll have your boots now, Private Smith," Burns continued. "It's a fair compensation." "I'll report you to the captain," I threatened. "Please do," Burns answered. "I've already told him what a troublemaker you are. He's not fond of dark-skinned soldiers. Did you know that? He thinks it's against the laws of nature. Anything you say, he'll take for a lie." "Eben will tell the captain," I said, "and Greenlaw and the others. He'll believe them. You won't get away with this." "Of course I will, you fool. I'm not going to wear these boots. Your feet have been in them for months. I shall find a home for them far away from here. Any complaints taken to the captain about me will be dismissed as nonsense." His voice hardened. "Take them off." "Do it yourself, dog meat." Burns lunged for me. Both my arms were held fast, but my feet were not bound. As he reached for my throat, I kicked his belly hard as I could with both of my boots. He made a most satisfying sound as he flew through the air. But then he stood and looked at his companions. "You know what to do." The 2 men holding me each had 6 fists. When I finally woke up, my boots were gone, my belly hurt wicked, and my skull felt like it had been hit with a hammer. My feet were cold but not frostbit, so I could not have been lying there overly long. Burns and his picaroons had vanished, their tracks hidden by the fast-falling snow. Chapter 28, Saturday, February 7th to Wednesday, February 11th, 1778. No, I did not tell them who stole my boots. Yes, that was a mistake, for it led to evil. But no, I would not go back and change that if I could. My friends woke to find me sitting in front of the fire trying to warm my boots and dry my stockings. Warm my toes and dry my stockings. I explained my lack of boots but gave few details of the attack. Claimed I'd been knocked senseless at the start of it. I'd hoped they'd been too tired or hungry or cold to pay much heed to my misfortune. Instead, they clustered around me and weighed the matter carefully. Eben sat on the log next to mine. My stockings are dry, he said, tugging at his boot. Put them on. You'll need to tell the sergeant, Faulkner said. Don't be a half-wit, Eben said. Sergeant Burns doesn't give a fig for Curzon. Then find a lieutenant, Faulkner said. Tell the new captain or report it to the brigade headquarters. The officers need to know this kind of thievery is afoot. He paused and cleared his throat. Beg pardon, Curzon, for saying afoot. Ha! I put my left foot on my right knee and rubbed the bottom of it. There's no point in telling anyone. The officers know we're desperate for boots and blankets. And everything else, interrupted Aaron Barry. Their time is best spent finding supplies for all of us, I continued, not chasing after rogues they'll never find. Greenlaw picked at his teeth with a splinter of wood. I'll tell the sergeant to mark you present but unfit for duty at the roll call. So we can sleep all day whilst we work in the cold? Aaron's face twisted up with petulance. That's not fair. I agree, I said. We'll have 7 pairs of shoes and boots on 8 pairs of feet. We should take turns being barefooted. On your day without shoes, you get to stay in the hut. We should report as unfit for duty every day until spring, muttered Aaron. All of us. Enough. The loud shout came from the meekest of all of us, Benny Edwards. He stepped up to Aaron and stuck his finger in his chest. Go on. Take your poxy bones down to the redcoats. You're just the sort they deserve. You're an idler and a traitor, Aaron Barry. Everyone started shouting then, accusing and cussing and venting their spleens with fury. The winds outside blew fierce but could not match the storm of discontent in our hut. Benny poked Aaron's chest one more time. Aaron swatted away the lad's hand. We all tensed, expecting Aaron to throw a punch, but he stood still, swallowing over and over, his fist shaking by his side. Finally, Aaron gave a mighty sniff. To my astonishment, he blinked back tears. Next time you call me a traitor, you shall regret it, runt, he said. If the rest of you mangy lot can withstand this encampment, I can too. Eben pulled a louse from his stocking and pitched it into the fire. That's what passes for an apology from the Barry side of the family. The blizzard ambushed all conversation after that. For the first 2 days of the storm, we received no rations, but we had to continue building the abattis and other fortifications. I wore Eben's boots the first day and Aaron Barry's shoes the second. Both gave me blisters that popped and bled. Toward the end of the second day, snow fell faster than any of us had ever seen, and we were sent back to our huts early. Messengers sent to the Congress in York rode only a few miles before turning back, afraid they would die of the bitter cold. Wagons could not pass through the thick snow. Ice choked the rivers and stopped all boats. The third day began with a heavy knock on the door. No roll call today, shouted Burns. No work details. Stay in your hut. We ate fire cake for every meal that day and the next, and we were grateful for it. On the 5th day and the 6th, we had only water, flavored with bark, bone chips, and a piece of leather. We later heard that the fellow in General McIntosh's brigade grew so hungry in that storm, he stole a tallow candle from an officer's hut and ate it. Never heard what happened after they took him to the hospital. There were whispers that some companies had cooked the meat of the dead horses, but no one ever admitted it. There were also whispers of petitions being written by common soldiers like us begging their officers, General Washington, and most of all, the Congress, to ease our suffering. We talked about writing too, but we had no paper to write upon. Chapter 29, Thursday, February 12th, 1778. The skies cleared after 6 days of storming. Greenlaw came in after the sun rose with an armful of wood. We're supposed to line up outside for an inspection. Bunch of knobs on horses are making their way down the outer line. Here? Not on the parade? I asked. Maybe they've finally come to their senses, Sylvanus said, wrapping his hands in rags. No point in making us walk all that way. Maybe it's the Brigadier General, said Evan, come to send us home until spring. Greenlaw shook his head. No uniforms on 'em, and their horses are fat. Can't be officers. I wrapped my canvas blanket around my middle and buttoned my jacket over it. Let's hope they're quick about it. We waded in the knee-deep snow, covered with all the rags and blanket scraps we owned. The wind blew hard, driving the snow into small mountains on the north side of every hut. John Burns approached. 2 lines, 2 lines, he shouted to us. Everybody out, no excuses. His cry was echoed by the other sergeants. As far as I could see in both directions along the outer line, soldiers stumbled out of their huts into the deep snow. Some leaned on friends because they were weak from fever or frostbitten in the feet. My stockings stayed dry a few heartbeats, then the snow seeped into the wool. From my toenails up to the knee buckles of my breeches soon felt like blocks of ice. I stood on my hat, but it made no difference. The cold knifed through my skin, seared my flesh, and buried deep into my bones. Tears came to my eyes, but I wiped them away before anyone noticed. If I could just stand the pain a few moments more, my feet would go blessedly numb. A collection of gentlemen in long, warm coats atop healthy horses approached from the north. Greenlaw was wrong. There was one officer among them, our brigade commander, Brigadier General Enoch Poor, riding a sickly-looking mare. They stopped 5 huts away to speak to the men there. When John Burns walked away to confer with the other sergeant, Greenlaw dashed over for a quick palaver with the fellows in front of our neighboring hut and came back grinning. It's that committee from Congress. Oh, huzzah, Sylvanus said. They've come all the way from York to watch us starve. Don't be such a grumbler, said Greenlaw. You've been shouting that they're ignoring us. Tss, warned Henry Barry. Burns is coming back. John Burns took his place in between the fellows from our company and the next hut south, which was also under his command. He wore the boots that he'd worn since Albany, but I was certain his greatcoat was newly acquired, likely the trade he made for my boots. Maybe they'll send us home, Evan whispered to me. Just until the winter ends. Sylvanus shook his head. They'll write reports and drink Madeira in front of a blazing fire. Instead of making any decisions, they'll form another committee. Shut your bone boxes, Burns ordered. One day I would toss his greatcoat in the deepest, foulest privy trench in the camp. I would make sure that he was wrapped in it before the tossing. As the congressman approached, we put our shoulders back and lifted our chins, even old Sylvanus and lazy Aaron. We were American soldiers, and there was pride enough in that to make a fellow stand tall. The wind swirled ropes of snow around our legs. The 4 committee members were wrapped in so many layers of warm clothing that they were more resembled bolts of cloth than congressmen. Their hats were pulled low and their scarves wrapped high against the wind. The Brigadier General was more hardened to the cold and did not require so much padding. A 6th man trailed behind the group. His horse was smaller, and he wore an ordinary surtout instead of the comfortable and luxurious greatcoats of the other men. At first I thought he might be a scribe or a clerk hired for the writing of notes and reports. But not all men of the Congress were rich. This fellow could be one from a humble background. The Brigadier General waved to Burns to step forward and join them. The 2 lead riders unwrapped the scarves from their faces and leaned forward, their hands on their saddle pommels, to ask questions of the sergeant. We could not hear what was said. The wind blew their words away from us. The gentleman on the brown stallion turned in his saddle to speak with the man at the trailing edge of the group. The poor fellow spurred his horse forward a few steps, bent forward to listen, and then unwrapped the cloths from his face so that he could speak. The sight of his face staggered me as hard as a blow from an axe. James Bellingham had come to camp. Before. When I was 10 years old, a tailor came to the kitchen of the Bellingham house. I stood on a chair so he could measure me for a velvet waistcoat and breeches with pewter buttons at the knees. The new suit of clothes arrived the day that James Bellingham turned 25 years old. His father, Judge Bellingham, gave young Master James splendid gifts on the occasion of that birthday: a house of his own, a share of the family's ships, and enough money to marry a lady. And me. My father packed my new clothes in one of the chests that were loaded on the wagon. After much protest, I sat next to it for the short ride to the new house. As soon as Master Bellingham was distracted, I ran down Newbury Street, back to the world I knew. I begged my father to let me stay with him. Father talked calmly, explaining that we ought to be grateful that our masters lived so close to each other. We'd be able to pass most Sunday afternoons together. I hollered and called him a bad name, and he paddled my backside. I ran away a week later, this time to a ship preparing to sail for France. I was unafraid of climbing to the top of the highest mast, so they took me on. The night before we left, the captain set a small gold ring in my right ear, the mark of a real sailor. The judge's hired men boarded the ship at dawn. They trussed me like a pig and carried me back to the Newbury Street. Judge Bellingham ordered my father to beat me with a leather strap on my naked back. He and Master James watched to make sure father did a proper job. I tried not to cry, for I knew it would upset my father more, but I could not help myself. I turned my head to look back at him once, just as the strap cracked in the air. The end of it sliced a line open along my jawbone. Blood fell. The judge said, "That's enough for now, Caesar." My father dropped to his knees and wept. The velvet waistcoat was green.